It's cool to see the way that God works in your life. It's really cool when you can see, when you can actually look and see God's sovereign hand moving things around. Um, as Dad mentioned, for this class, I have to preach a 30-minute sermon, two of them actually. So you don't just have to suffer through tonight; you're gonna have to suffer another time as well. But we had to pick a passage of scripture from Ephesians for the sermon, and right away I jumped on Ephesians 2. Right at the beginning, it's a real familiar passage. I figured I already know that one a little bit, but someone else had already taken it. So I kind of half-heartedly was like, oh, no, what am I going to do? And what I did was I leafed through Ephesians, and I kind of looked at the different parts of it, and I was like, I'll just pick this. And I didn't put a lot of thought into it. But I thought, who cares? Whatever it has, whatever the passage is on, it doesn't matter because it's my choice on what the passage is, and I'll just preach it at the church on a Sunday night and be able to preach about whatever the passage is. And then Dad told me that I'd be preaching at Andy's baptism. And I was like, in my mind I was thinking, oh no, I just picked a random set of verses out of Ephesians for a baptismal service. And I was thinking in my mind, what are the odds that this message is going to have anything to do with baptism? And in my mind, I was concerned. I wasn't sure what was going to happen, and then I actually looked at the passage in a little bit more in depth, and it was on unity in the church, and I just kind of blew me away to think, my goodness, that could have been on anything, and what would be more appropriate for a baptismal service than unity in the Spirit. So what we're going to do is talk just about that. We're going to be in Ephesians 4. But before we go through Ephesians 4, I'm going to give you some background on what's going on in Ephesians. I'd hate to just throw you into Ephesians 4 without you knowing what's been going on in Ephesians 1 through 3. So what Paul does is in Ephesians 1 through 3, this is obviously his letter to the Ephesian church. In Ephesians 1 through 3, he sets out all these doctrinal rules. He sets out all these facts about God, who God is, who we are in relation to God, who we all these facts about Jesus. And what he's doing is he's just giving all these different factual informations about God, teaching doctrine. And that's what he does for those first three. And in the first three, just a couple of them, some of the stuff we cover is our spiritual blessings in the heavenly places, God's election of his saints, that's in chapter 1. Our redemption through his blood, that's chapter 1. His plan to unite all things in him, chapter 1. Our inheritance, chapter 1. God raising Christ from the dead, also chapter 1. Grace through faith, not of works, chapter 2. Our oneness in Christ, chapter 2. And the mystery of the gospel in chapter 3. And I'm sure I've missed some as well. But the idea here is that what Paul did was he took all these different doctrines and he hammered the Ephesians with it. And he was like, here's what you need to know. Here's the facts about Jesus. Here's the facts about God. And just taught him all this stuff. And then what he's about to do, he's about to move into the second half of the book of Ephesians. And starting in chapter 4, he starts teaching application. Okay, so here's what you do in light of all these things that I just taught you, is what he's saying. So now that they know they're a child of God, now that they know this stuff, what he's saying is, now what do you do because you're a child of God? And it's cool to see how Paul informs them of that. Like he makes it so clear that he wants that he teaches the doctrine first, and he's like, here's the doctrine, because you can't live in light of God until you know who he is, until you know the facts of God, until you know the doctrine. And he makes sure to tell the Ephesians that. And I love the way MacArthur says it. He says doctrine and then your duty. You start with your doctrine, go to your duty. You start with your principle, go to your practice. And that's a really good way to think about it. And basically what he says is that the practices apart from the principles are worthless. And that's what Paul's saying here. You need to know the facts. You need to know the doctrine in order to go into your duty, in order to know what is required in the Christian life. So with that in mind, with that little bit of background, knowing that we're going into the applicational stages of Ephesians, let's just read through the text real quick. That's going to be Ephesians 4, 1 through 6. So, I therefore, a prisoner of the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you are called to the one hope that belongs to your call. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. So, Paul starts out by saying, I, Paul, a prisoner of the Lord. And at this point in time, Paul was obviously a prisoner. He was a prisoner to Rome. he was in a prison in Rome, and he was writing his prison epistles. So, and this is to Ephesians. And he starts out by making sure he says, I'm a prisoner. And what he's not doing here is informing them for the first time that he's a prisoner. He's not saying, hi, it's Paul, I'm in prison. By the way, here's what you're supposed to do in light of what I just taught you. That would be not a good way to inform them of that. What he's doing is he's establishing credibility. Paul's saying, look, just so you know, I'm in prison because I'm living out what my faith should be. It would be a perfect instance if he wasn't living out his faith for the Ephesians to be able to say, well, why are you teaching us this stuff? You don't do it yourself. And Paul would have nothing to say to that, but that's not what's happening. Paul's saying, I'm a prisoner of God. I'm about to tell you all, or I'm a prisoner of Rome for God. I'm about to tell you all this stuff about doctrine. Or I just told you all this stuff about doctrine. I'm about to tell you all the stuff of what to do with it. And he's saying, just so you know, I've done the stuff with it to the point where I'm in prison. I'm still writing you, even from prison. And it's interesting just that he establishes that with them, so that way he gets his credibility. And we've seen him do this before. Paul definitely is known for saying, he would never say, do as I say, not as I do. He's always do as I do. And we read that even in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. He starts out by saying, be imitators of me as I am of Christ. Paul is sure and very careful to say, look, what I'm about to tell you is not something I'm not willing to do myself. And that's why he starts out with saying, I, Paul, a prisoner of the Lord. I'm in prison living my life the way I'm about to tell you to live your life. So he goes on after that to say, he goes, I, Paul, a prisoner of the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called. So I urge you to walk in a worthy manner of the calling which I just told you about, which is all in chapter 3. All of those things I told you, the doctrine, the facts about Jesus, I'm urging you to live your lives in light of it. And it's so, you hear it all the time at church, or at our church, that head knowledge isn't enough. It's not about, Christian life isn't about how much knowledge you can amass into your mind and then be able to say, go to church and be able to have all the answers and be able to say, hey, I know that answer. Look at me, I'm the smartest. That's not what the Christian life's about. Yes, learning doctrine is very important. Learning about Christ is important. But in light of that, you have to make an application. You have to bring that into your life. And we read that in James 2 as well. James, in James 2, he talks about how faith apart from works is dead. He says, you believe that God is one, you do well, even the demons believe and shudder. He says, you believe God is one, you believe the doctrines of God, you believe in God, so do the demons. And that really puts it into perspective to us. So often Christians are living their lives in a way that is just like they go to church, they get the head knowledge, they go home and they live like they want. They don't live the way they're supposed to, they don't live in light of the knowledge, they don't make the application. What Paul's saying here is that you have to make the application, and he's urging them to do so at this moment. And we say, what are we supposed to do with that knowledge? And we learned that right in Matthew 28, the Great Commission. It says, go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Teach them to observe all that I have commanded you, and behold, I am with you always to the end of this age. He says, take that doctrine you just learned, take all that stuff that I've taught you, take all the stuff that you've learned, and put it into practice. Go make disciples, go baptize, go do what you're supposed to do as a Christian in light of that doctrine. Without the application, the doctrine just isn't enough. So Christians, as Paul just said, are urged to walk in a worthy manner of the calling. And they're supposed to walk, as we'll get into, by maintaining unity in the Spirit. And that'll come up in a bit in the text. But basically in this text, Paul is going to lay out 5 points that are about maintaining the unity in the Spirit. And his points are that you have to have humility, you have to have gentleness, you have to have patience, you have to bear with one another in love, and you have to rally around doctrinal truth. Those are the 5 essential characteristics that it takes to maintain a unity in the Spirit. And he starts out by saying that directly in verse 1, or directly in verse 2 at the beginning. He says, with all humility. Humility is foundational for Christianity, but it's one of the things that sets Christianity far different from the world. I love this quote from Dr. MacArthur. It says, although humility is at the heart of Christian character, no virtue is more foreign to the world's ways. The world exalts pride, not humility. Throughout history, fallen human nature, ruled by Satan, the prince of this world, has shunned humility and advocated pride. For the most part, humility has been looked on as weakness and impotence, something ignoble to be despised People unashamedly claim to be proud of their jobs, their children, their accomplishments, and on and on. Society loves to recognize and praise those who have accomplished something outstanding. Ostentation, boasting, parading, and exultation are the world's stock in trade. Peyton Manning, a couple years ago, had just won an awesome game against the Baltimore Ravens, who were the current Super Bowl champions at the time. And this was years ago. But it was a great game. He had thrown 7 touchdown passes and performed amazingly. But when he was interviewed, he dodged every chance he could possibly get at taking credit for it. And in the first part, the reporter basically says, "Is that the best game of your career?" Manning replies, "I don't know. I guess I haven't had a whole lot of time to think about it. Our offensive line did a great job protecting against the tough bunch up front." Then the reporter says, "Do you think 7 touchdowns was possible in an NFL game, considering it's been 44 years? Manning said, "Yeah, Joe Kapp." Not him, Joe Kapp. A great Canadian quarterback out of Cal. And the last thing the reporter said was, "You've had many magical days and nights in your career, but do you understand the magnitude of this?" And Manning said, "It was a great team win." And I'm not just up here pitching for Peyton Manning. What I'm saying is the world found that so crazy that they literally wrote an article about it. Humility comes so unnaturally to the world. It's so, how often, let's be honest, do we see a professional athlete accomplish a great feat and then be humble about it? We don't see it often. It's just not something that happens. I just got done with a book by John Ortberg called The Life You've Always Wanted. It was a really good book, and in it John Ortberg talks about humility and how even when he does something humble, he ends up normally following it up with pride and ruining the humble thing. And that hit me hard because I think that that's something that we all do, and I know I do it. But things that we should just naturally do as a Christian, for instance, you're walking through Walmart and some lady's bag breaks and her groceries go over the floor, and say you grab that for her, put it up out of your act of in humility. But let's be honest, when you're walking away, what are you thinking? It's usually like, I definitely just helped that lady. Look at me, like that's what Jesus would have done. I did that too. And in fact, the matter is, like, that's not a good response. But that's, our society has cultivated so much of that, so much. Be proud about what you are. Be proud about what you've done. All this stuff that we lost humility. It's completely unnatural to us. It's unnatural to our society, to the point when somebody does it, it literally gets written in an article on the internet. Humility, we wonder then, well, why is humility important? When you're humble, you're extolling others. When you're humble, you're serving others, and it inevitably leads to less quarrel. You can't be part of a church and then be constantly proud, constantly all about yourself, and expect the church to succeed, much less maintain unity in the Spirit. So his first, that's Paul's first characteristic that's necessary for maintaining unity, and that is you have to have humility. Paul goes on to say, and gentleness, with all humility and gentleness. Gentleness is also, a lot of the time, the word for gentleness is translated as meekness. They're very synonymous, and some translations will use that term, meekness. And meekness isn't the idea of having no power. Meekness is the idea of having power, but having that power under control. We have a tendency in our society, once again, to look at meekness and gentleness as weakness. We mistake meekness for weakness. And when someone, you think about it, when's the last time you watched an action movie where somebody came up and did something to the lead guy and then he walked away? That doesn't happen. It doesn't make for a good movie. It doesn't succeed in our society. Gentleness and meekness, turning the other cheek, having power but not using it, that's not something that comes in our society. That's not something that is natural. But we think about it as weakness, but then we look at Jesus, who is regularly described as meek and is easily the most powerful person to ever walk the planet. You think about power under control in verses on meekness of Jesus. We have Matthew 11:29 through 30. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. 2 Corinthians 10:1 says, I, Paul, entreat you by the meekness and gentleness of Christ, who am humble when face to face with you, but bold toward you when I am away. And we have tons more verses we could talk about for the meekness and gentleness of Jesus, but we just don't have the time. There's even examples of it as well in Scripture. We have Matthew 26:50 through 53. This is the night of Jesus' arrest. He said, Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you came to do," speaking to Judas. And then they came up and laid hands on Jesus and seized him, and behold, one of those who were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels?" Talk about power under control. Jesus is saying, look, do you think I can't ask my Father and have him send 12 legions of angels to come out and wipe out the entire group of people trying to arrest me? Like, you want to talk about, nobody has that power except for Jesus. And yet he didn't do it because he realized he had a duty. He had something he had to accomplish. So he exercised gentleness, meekness. He took that power, which he could have used to totally free himself and put himself in a luxurious position, and he didn't. He used meekness. Listen to this quote about meekness. Learn the true meaning of meekness by listening to jockeys and horse trainers after a horse race. The horse that wins the race is the meekest on the track. This is the horse most under control, the horse that responds most quickly to the jockey's guidance. The self-willed horse, the factious horse, is frequently left at the post. When he does get started, he may run faster than some of the others, but he does not finish with the leaders, who are meek. Power can get you somewhere, but not like power under control. Power with no control will just lead to destruction. It'll lead to the destruction of the church. Power under control, meekness, gentleness, that's what's essential for maintaining the unity in the Spirit. If you have your power and you have no control for it, it'll just destroy it. The third point that Paul makes is he says with patience. So we have with all humility and gentleness and with patience. That's the third one. And patience is actually the product of humility and gentleness. Most of the heroes of the Bible could not have accomplished their goal without patience. And you think about it, I mean, I can't think of any any of the major heroes of the Bible that could have accomplished their duty, they're given by God, without exercising some form of patience. You think about Moses. Moses led the Israelites through the wilderness tirelessly, while they disobeyed God by worshiping idols, complained non-stop, and so much more. Job watched everything he had get either killed or destroyed, and he just waited patiently for the trial to end, despite his friends coming up and telling him, you need to forsake, or you did something wrong, and his wife telling him, you need to curse God and die. What Job did was he just waited patiently, and he made it through the trial. He exercised patience, and because of that, he was able to make it through. You have Joseph, who patiently worked his way up the ranks after being sold as a slave by his family, and eventually reaped the benefits of it. I mean, you want to talk about patience there? I mean, he went through so much, and you could read through Joseph, and you'll just see, or through the story of Joseph, and you will just see all the different ways that Joseph exercised his patience. Abraham, who wasn't given the son he was promised until he was 100 years old, he waited until he was 100 years old and still was able to reap the benefits of that. And they're not just Old Testament. We have New Testament examples of this as well. Look at Paul, 2 Corinthians 11:25-28. 3 times I was beaten with rods, once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I was adrift at sea, on frequent journeys, in danger from rivers, danger from robbers, dangers from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from false brothers, in toil and hardships, through many a sleepless night, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure, and apart from other things, there is the daily pressure on me of my anxiety for all the churches. I mean, I don't know of anybody who's persecuted more than that, and patience got him through it. And it's not just the biblical people who are accomplishing things by patience. Any major feat is going to require some form of patience. Listen to this quote: "Patience on the part of young Clyde Tombaugh is what led him finally to discover the planet Pluto. Astronomers had already calculated a probable orbit for the suspected heavenly body, which had they examined scores of telescopic photographs, each showing tens of thousands of star images in pairs under the blink comparator or dual microscope. It often took 3 days to scan a single pair of photographs. It was exhausting, eye-cracking work, in Tombaugh's own words, brutal tediousness. The search went on for months. Star by star, Tombaugh examined 20 million images. Finally, on February 18, 1930, as he was blinking a pair of photographs in the constellation Gemini, he said, I suddenly came upon the image of Pluto. It was the most dramatic astronomic discovery in nearly 100 years, and it was made possible because of patience." Great things require patience to accomplish, and a church cannot even continue being a church without patience. It'll break down. Without the ability to endure hardships, without the ability to endure suffering, without the ability to be able to look past when somebody wrongs you. That happens in a church. That's part of being with people. People are going to wrong you, and you're going to have to exercise patience. Without patience, there's no way to maintain a church, let alone maintain the unity of the church in the Spirit. So we're talking about maintaining unity in the Spirit. So far, we have our humility, we have gentleness or meekness, and we have the third one, which is patience. So those are our three. We're going to move on to the fourth. So we have, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love. Love for one another is essential for unity in the Spirit. Galatians 5:14 through 15 says, "For the whole law is fulfilled in one word, that you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, watch out that you are not consumed by one another." The majority, if not all, the problems churches would totally go away if we could just start loving each other. I mean, you think about what are the different things that happen in a church? What are the things that churches are known for that cause dissension, that break up churches, that cause churches to split? I mean, how many split churches do we have in the area? I mean, you think about what are the things that cause that? Gossip, complaining, jealousy, rudeness, anger. The list goes on, and every single one of those is most definitely not characterized by love. They would completely go away if we could just love each other. As far as unity in the Spirit goes, it's definitely not possible without love. It has to have love. 1 Corinthians 13:4 through 7 says, "Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things." Let's take a quick, closer look at this. Love is patient. There's one of the ones we already talked about. Love is kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant. Humility. There's another one we already talked about, and we got one more. Or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. Sounds like the opposite of gentleness to me. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. It just goes on. By loving each other, we're fulfilling. Love is fulfilling other commandments. When you love someone, you don't gossip about them. You don't steal from them. You don't wrong them. And when Christians stop wronging each other, that's when you're maintaining unity. When we're loving each other and because of that being patient with each other and being humble and having gentleness, what we're doing is we're fostering a community where we're going to maintain unity in the Spirit. And that's how we're going to do this. Going through to the final point, Paul makes one last point that talks about how you're going to maintain unity in the Spirit. And what he says is, after bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit, as we've been talking in the bond of peace, there is one body, one Spirit, just as you were called to the one hope that belongs to your call. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. The last is slightly less evident in the text, but is still there. Excuse me. Paul is saying you got to rally around doctrinal truth. And at our church, we place such a high price on doctrinal truth. And Paul did too. That's why Paul started out the first 3 chapters of Ephesians by laying out doctrine. He said, look, you got to learn this first. You got to learn who God is. But he's saying now what we got to do in order to maintain this unity is take all this that we just learned in 1 and 3, bring it over to 4, and rally around it. And we have the opportunity to take all these truths that we learn from God, that all these things that we learn about God through His Word, and we can just rally around them and find that common ground, worship God together, and foster unity. And it's excellent. I mean, it's exciting to talk about. You talk about, one hope, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, and on a side note, water baptism, which not only represents Christ's death and resurrection, is actually also a representation of how somebody enters into the church. It's the initiatory rite of people going into the church. And so tonight we have the opportunity to see Andy Kelly, who decided that he wants to take that leap. He wants to go take the initiatory rite into the unity of the church. So even by what we're doing tonight, we're fostering that we're rallying around that doctrinal truth. Look how many people came out. They all came out because they wanted to see Andy come into that unity. We want to bring him in. We want to be able to rally around that truth of baptism and say, Andy, that's awesome. So glad that you want to fulfill that biblical command, and it's great. And that's what we need to keep doing. We need to keep rallying around all these great doctrinal truths together. Rallying around these is inevitably going to maintain the unity in the Spirit. So, maintaining unity in the Spirit isn't a choice for believers, obviously. I think a lot of times we as believers look at our church going as if it's enough. Like, okay, I went to church today. That's all I got to do. Now I'm part of the community of believers. Like, all I got to do is go to that church. But as we see, like, we need to do more to maintain and foster unity in the Spirit. And basically, the best 5 ways to do that were just laid out to you in the text. So just one more time, we are to be humble, we are to be gentle, we are to be patient, we are to love one another, and we are to rally around doctrinal truth. And I know a lot of you might be thinking, like, we learn a lot of stuff over and over again in our lives as Christians, and we don't always hit unity in the Spirit a lot. So you have a tendency to think, well, how important really is unity in the Spirit? How important is it that I make sure I foster this, I make sure I maintain this? Is it really that important? Because I've never heard about it before. It's what some of you have to be thinking. Well, I just wanted to end with reading Jesus' high priestly prayer the night before his arrest. See what he was concerned about. I do not ask for these only, but also for those who believe in me through their word, that they may all be one, just as you, Father, are in me and I in you. That they also may be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. The glory that you have given me I have given to them, and they may be one, even as we are one. I in them and you in me, and they may become perfectly one, so that the world may know that you sent me and loved them, even as you loved me. Father, I desire that they also, whom you have given me, may be with me where I am, to see my glory that you have given me, because you loved me before the foundation of the world. O righteous Father, even though the world does not know you, I know you, and these know that you have sent me. I made known to them your name, and I will continue to make it known, that the love with which you have loved me may be in them, and I in them. Jesus was concerned about unity. Unity between him and the Father, unity between us and the Father, unity between us and Jesus. Unity is important, and we don't hit on it enough. We don't live our lives in light of it enough, but we need to. So I think it's really important that we keep that in mind. Let's close in prayer. Father, thank you for continuing to teach us more and more every day, Lord, for pointing out the areas in our life which we need to do better, for telling us things that we don't always hear, Lord, telling us that we need to, in this case, foster unity. We need to maintain unity in you and in the Spirit. We thank you for that. I pray that we do that. I pray that we're gentle. Lord, I pray that we're humble. I pray that we're patient. I pray that we bear with one another in love. I pray that we rally around your doctrine. Lord, we thank you for all those things you've gifted us. We know that through you it's possible. We know that through you we have the opportunity to be able to do that, a chance to do that. And I pray, Lord, that we live our lives in light of that, and that in all we do we strive to do it. In your holy name, amen.